here to talk a little bit about digestion. So, digestion is a north to south process. So, when a lot of people think about digestion, they of course think about, chewing their food and the stomach and the intestines. But I sort of want to break down each piece of the north to south process so that you really understand the nutrient needs for each process and kind of what they do and how important they are. Because I know proton pump inhibitors, which are the antacids, either over the counter or prescribed, are very common these days. And they really do not only disrupt nutrition, but your mineral absorption, and can create a host of issues. So understanding the digestive process and where problems might be happening can really help you maybe dissect what might be going on and help prevent from getting you to having to use one of the digestion drugs, most likely what's called a PPI or a proton pump inhibitor, which are the antacids. So as I mentioned, digestion starts in the mouth. Actually, digestion really starts when you see food and you smell food, right? We all know when we smell the delicious food that we start to salivate and our mouth actually starts to get ready to receive food. So that's actually the initiation. So really taking in your food before you start eating really is a part of the digestion process, right? It's helping those parotid glands right here, which produces your saliva, get ready for the foods that's about to come into the mouth. So of course we chew our food, which I know you've heard it 100 times. Chewing your food is super important. And it is important because obviously it's the first step to the mechanical actual breakdown, right, of that food into smaller particles and compounds so that we can assimilate them. But also part of the process of chewing your food is getting the saliva all over your food. And the reason is in our saliva produced by our parotid glands, there's actually tags, right? It's telling the body kind of where to send the food and what to do with it. And so you can actually taste food, and the body will actually start to detect what is in that food and actually start to initiate some of that physiology even before the food gets to the cell because it knows that it's coming. So this is something called a neurolingual response. And so chewing your food and getting it super wet with the saliva and tagging it properly is super important for digestion because it helps the body to do the job of really getting the nutrients where they need to go. So once we swallow our food, of course, it goes to the stomach. Now, the pH of our stomach should be very low. It should be 1.5 to 2. However, most of us, because we don't have enough B vitamins and zinc. So B vitamins and zinc are used up very quickly because of stress and other things, environmental toxins. We use up the zinc more quickly. And those are key nutrients to produce hydrochloric acid. Hydrochloric acid is what keeps that stomach at a super low pH. Your stomach should be an acid producing machine. I know you're also most of mainstream tells you that you have too much acid. In reality, really what's happening is you don't have enough acid. And so what happens is that bolus of food sits in your stomach and it doesn't break down, right? And we get symptoms of the inorganic acids kind of from the food sitting there rotting coming up on us. So really, if you're having signs of indigestion, one of the main things that we actually do is to try to add more hydrochloric acid to help you break down the food. Now, there could be other issues, right? Like a hiatal hernia, which chiropractors can correct, and those are very common. And I do suggest that if you see a chiropractor that he checks that for you. But the hydrochloric acid production, by the way, which decreases as we age. So after 35, your production of hydrochloric acid naturally goes down. So you think about as we get older, those are the most of the people that complain about the indigestion, right? So that's because we're not producing enough of that hydrochloric acid, most likely because we're nutrient deficient, but there are other reasons. Also, that stomach should be an acid producing machine because It's one of our defenses against things that we consume in the food, like parasites and bacteria. So that hydrochloric acid is a natural killer for a lot of those bugs that come in through the stomach. So what happens also, I just want to mention not drinking large amounts of fluid while you're eating can be a good thing, especially as you get older, because you don't want to dilute that hydrochloric acid, okay? So as that bolus of foods gets broke down in the stomach, and if that stomach is acidic enough, right? That stomach, that bolus of food has to be acid enough to trigger what's now going to come into the stomach before that food can move into the intestines. And so once that bolus of food in the stomach is acid enough. So if you're taking an overcount of the antacid or even a prescription antacid, that never happens because that bolus of food is brought up to a pH of 5, 6, 7, sometimes higher. So when that bolus of food is acidic enough, it triggers the gallbladder to release bile, which is very alkaline, and also the pancreas to release pancreatic enzymes, also alkaline, to alkalize that bolus of food a little bit before it moves into the small intestine. So if that does not happen, that sets you up for what they call duodenal ulcers. So ulcers right at the base of the stomach moving into the small intestine. And so that's why we want that bolus of food to be super acidic, and we want to have enough hydrochloric acid so we get the release of that bile and those pancreatic enzymes to keep that food moving down the line, right? So in the intestines, of course, our small intestines, this is where a lot of our absorption happens, right? This is where we have broken down the food and it's getting down, and we have a really thin layer in our intestines where we can now assimilate the compounds that we've broken down. And so in order to keep the intestines healthy, the small intestine and the large intestines, I'll refer to that as the gut. In order to keep both of those healthy, we need a couple things. We need enough of water and electrolytes. So if you haven't watched the hydration video, please watch that. So hydration, proper hydration is super important to keep the food, of course, moving through the intestines, but we also need good fats, right? Good fats keep that bolus of food moving and triggered. It also obviously triggers bile release too if there's fats in that bolus of food. We need probiotics through fermented foods. So eating things like sauerkraut and pickles, drinking kombucha, or any fermented foods or vegetables really does support the pH, which means that pH in the intestines should be the small intestine should be a little bit more alkaline, right? Like 6.8. Remember, so the stomach should be super acidic, and then the intestine should be a little bit more alkaline. And of course, fiber. We need fiber to feed the good bacteria that live in our gut, right? So we have the microbiome layer. The microbiome layer is a layer of bugs that really support lots of things, our mood, our immune system. They also produce a mucilage layer, mucilins, which produce a mucus layer in our intestines, which is super important for our digestions and protecting the health of our villi. Our villi are along the line of our intestines, and that's what absorbs those nutrients. So to keep our intestines healthy, we need water and electrolytes, good fats, probiotics from fermented foods, and of course, fiber. And then lastly, I want to talk about the nervous system because that impacts digestion greatly. And we just want to, bring about, or for you to think about, the importance of sitting down and being calm when you're eating. Remember, you can only digest in what's called a parasympathetic state. Your parasympathetic is your rest and digest state. So if you're in a hurry, you're working at your desk, you're standing, you're talking on the phone and doing 14 other things while you're eating, your digestion just won't be as good because your nervous system is, keyed up a little bit. So we really want you to do just some simple things like taking 3 deep breaths before you start eating can be hugely impactful to your overall digestion. But if you can, sit down and of course, enjoy your meal because that all impacts your digestion. So I hope this was super helpful. If you have any questions about digestion, please reach out to your practitioner. They would love to answer more questions for you.